guys, it's me, Omegon, and welcome to another episode of GitWotch. This time we're going to be looking at a video that the Outer Circle did on the Tau that I've watched a few times since it's come out a few months ago. I know I'm late to the party like always, but I'm more do this for me and my group of friends than the subscribers I don't have, so whatever. This video came out not too long ago. It is by the Outer Circle's Australian guy. They're supposed to be a group of multiple people, but really the only one who's ever really on the channel is the guy who goes by Maka. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because I don't have a Australian accent. But this video I've watched a few times since it's come out, and every time I've seen it, it's like driven me more and more angry because unlike a lot of the other guys have covered for GitWatch so far, Outer Circle claims to be a consumer advocate. He tries to act like he actually looks out for everybody who is invested in Warhammer 40k if they're buying the tabletop or they're buying any of the books or anything. And really, even when he complains about stuff, he usually backpedals a lot, or he says stuff that his complaints don't make any sense, as you'll see with this one. And ultimately, he comes off as he's kind of chilling for GW in a weird backwards way anyway. And he especially shills for Forge World. He shills like hell for Forge World. So maybe we'll explore that in the future if I get people requesting about it. But really, I just wanted to explore this one because this video, he seems to be, stunningly full of shit. And you'll see what I mean.
The video today was actually inspired by a conversation I had with a gentleman in a Games Workshop store of all places. The guy collected Kroot. He'd built a large Kroot army up. He had it in his armies on parade, converted Narloks, Kroot Hogs, Shapers, all that kind of thing in this army. And that's cool. It's great to see people take a niche thing and make it their own if they fall in love with it. Totally for it. And it may have a little unhealthy appetite for them, considering how many there were, but I won't king shit.
I have to stop here for this. This is not a specific problem I have, where it is a specific problem I have. It's not a specific problem with what he's saying. Everything, so far, he's not saying anything that's bullshit. I just, in my opinion, as somebody who played Kroot Mercenaries, saying that having too many Kroot is some kind of weird thing seems really elitist and kind of shitty of you to say, honestly, just because the Kroot are one of the only factions that 40k has in them that's totally unique and not just a fantasy faction that's been transplanted to a sci-fi setting that's not really a sci-fi setting, or worse, in the case of the Tau, even though he'll say otherwise here, a sci-fi faction from another work that's just put into 40k. We've seen weird coalition. We've seen races like the Tau and other sci-fi before, and they kind of predate. The best go-to example for most people would probably be any of the races outside of humanity in Mass Effect, and the Covenant from the Covenant from Halo, which both of those are the Covenant came about around the same time, 2000. And the Mass Effect is obviously much, much later. But both of those were we've seen that in stuff that Robert Heinlein's done, stuff that was done by Kurt Vonnegut. We've seen that in most of the 1960s, 1970s classic science fiction of idealistic coalition alien race that are, everybody's together. We have a bright future ahead of us. We're going to conquer the galaxy through friendship and superior firepower and stuff like that. The Tau, what made them new at the time was their aesthetic, which he will, to his credit, Maka, will to his credit say that's true, that they had a relatively unique aesthetic that Jess Goodwin came up with.
Game in here. In any case, it really got me thinking about the parent faction and how roles have changed over time within it. The change of diversity within the Force and the fluff, you name it. So let's dive in and have a look at the army we all love to hate. Let's start with 3rd edition and the origins of the army. The 3rd edition of the game was where we first met the Tau. Prior to this edition, some of their subservient subspecies, such as the Kroot, had existed within the lore, cue terrible picture, and some bizarre artwork did manage to make its way into the 3rd edition rulebook of all places. Gav Thorpe actually began developing what eventually would become the Tau in the early 1990s, and the story goes that he initially conceived them as a counterpart to the Lizardmen faction in Warhammer Fantasy. And in the same way that the Eldar are the counterpart of the High Elves, he called them the Shishel. Like the Lizardmen, the Shishel had a caste-based society. The Shishel had 5 castes: Earth, Air, Fire, Water, and Spirit. The race was ruled by a caste of Psykers. In 1999, Thorpe revisited his Shishel concept when Games Workshop asked him to develop a new army for 40,000.
This was a terrible mistake, considering Gav Thorpe is a fantastic idea guy, but every time he actually does like the meat of his work, it looks like shit. And I mean, if you be familiar with my statement, if you have seen anything he's done with the Eldar since like 4th edition onward, as like he was the guy that was responsible for the shenanigans, such as Cain being Khorne's angry teenage son and stuff like that. Like just really weird. And as far as like, nothing he's saying is wrong here. This was definitely like their origins was Gav Thorpe and Jess Goodwin. An issue I take with what he said, though, is that like caste systems are not a specific thing to East Asia. And though the Tau had kind of like an Asiatic, like a quote unquote Asiatic aesthetic, Craftworld Eldar are by far more actually like, Asian looking. And the Tau themselves, the only thing that was really Asiatic about them at their heart was the big mecha aesthetic that they were going for. That's mostly popular in anime. That's more popular in the West than it was in the East. And specifically, like the only parts of the East that where it was popular at all was Japan. And Japan is a really weird market to foreign products, where you'll have small numbers of very, very obsessed people that'll look into it, and large numbers of people that are, and the vast majority of the rest of the market will just not care about the product at all because it's inferior Western garbage, so to speak. And they're very xenophobic people, and I don't know why Macca doesn't make a note of that, considering he is Australian. He should be very familiar with that kind of attitude in Oceania. In addition to that, like just what he said about the caste system being very Asiatic, it's honestly kind of weird because 40K is filled with caste systems. 40K's culture, and then like the acculturation of the majority of their factions is very feudal, and feudal systems were caste and class are similar sounding words in English for a reason. Like they're basically the same. There's if you have a class system, specifically a feudal class system with very little upward mobility, there's very little difference between it and a caste system. And like I wanted to point that out because it just seems weird to go, oh, they're obviously like Chinese, Indian, Japanese because they have this thing that every other human culture in history with a weird economy has ever had.
Our system then became part of the new Tau race. The Spirit caste was renamed Ethereal, and the Ethereals became non-psychic so as to differentiate them from the Eldar Seer Councils. Whereas most of the races in Warhammer 40,000 are based upon Tolkien-type fantasy races, Eldar are based.
That's not exactly true. Not to say that like it's exactly false either. It's just they're based on their own fantasy counterparts, which are Flanderizations of Tolkien fantasy races. The High Elves in Warhammer Fantasy have very little to do with most of the elven tribes of Tolkien's lore. Like the dwarves are, extreme versions of the dwarves that existed in Tolkien's lore. The orcs in 40K and fantasy, for that matter, are quite different, considering that like they don't really have They weren't really created by elves. They don't really have, like, you know, a singular Dark Lord. They're not a corrupted species. They're fucking mushrooms. They're weird mushrooms that hate everybody and love war and, like, pop out of the ground to fight stuff just because. Like, also, I should note here that it's still weird to me that nobody else has ever brought up the fact that, like Eldar being space elves is not even, like, is just a little too on point, because the word Eldar was Quenya for star people. That was, like, it was an actual word that was in a language Tolkien created for a tribe of elves that called themselves that. I don't know. It's like the deep nerding of 40K is gone in this day and age, and it's just sad to me nobody ever points out all the, like, the little references they put into their work, because almost everything in 40K is completely ripped off. Like, one of the only unique things is honestly the Kroot. And I'm sure somebody somewhere can point out that there's, like, a 1970s book that has, like, you know, weird terror bird Native Americans that have cannibalism powers.
High elves, orcs on orcs, that sort of thing. The culture and technology of the Tau was actually heavily inspired by Japanese science fiction. This idea was proposed by Jess Goodwin, who was a sculptor at Games Workshop, as a way to attract new players who weren't interested by the overall fantasy and space theme of the other Warhammer 40,000 races. Now, unofficially, the company wanted to expand into the Asian market, with their first stores starting to open up in the region in this time, and understanding the strong appeal of robot-based manga, the company concluded that they would best tackle the market with their own mechs, and sort of cashing in on the already established mecha fan base that was out there. The caste system deliberately echoes the martial arts and caste systems of actually East Asia, with the ethereal ruling class coming across as a sacred priesthood, such as the Kanushi from Japan, or perhaps more fittingly the Daoshi, a Taoist, priest from China.
I don't know. I guess I should give him a pass on all the mispronunciations he did there because of his accent. Whatever.
Also, I probably murdered the pronunciation of both those names, so feel free to correct me in the comments below, as
nobody's going to correct him in the comments.
Speaker. As for the miniatures range, the practical limitations of design at the time meant that they would be unable to craft large miniatures in plastic, and more niche units, such as the broadside battlesuit, would require white metal upgrades as their own custom kit, and unique and different kits to the Crisis suit would just simply be impractical.
This is retarded. Like, this doesn't have any bearing on reality at all. I understand where he's coming from when he said it wasn't practical, because if they were trying to make a mecha army with Tau first, like the first Tau Codex in 3rd edition, they completely failed because there's only 2 mecha in the... Well, 3 if you count stealth suits. There were only 3 mecha in the entire army. Crisis suits, broadsides, and stealth suits. And the stealth suits at the time were blisters that were basically the same size as Fire Warriors and were more like powered armor infantry than an actual mecha. And saying that you needed an entire custom kit for broadsides, or even saying something as dumb as broadsides were a niche unit, is ridiculous, considering broadsides, their kit was literally just a Crisis suit kit, but with it cost more because it had additional pewter parts in it for the stabilizer feet. The stabilizer jets that went over the jetpack in the back, and the 2 railguns themselves. While the rest of the kit was I may be wrong on this, but it had the Crisis suit weapon sprue missing. And then the Crisis suit itself was an incredibly versatile kit, and to this day is probably one of the most versatile unit in 40K. Barring maybe veteran Space Marine squads, when you can versatile in the sense of all the shit that it comes with when you open up a box, like an actual plastic kit. And as to what else he said, broadsides being a niche unit is laughable. Broadsides were in every single army because they were and always have been, and probably always will be, unless GW suddenly decides to nuke them like they did Carnifexes and make them replaced by something else. Broadsides have always been and always were and always have been ridiculously fucking good for their points. You get 3 twin-linked strength 10 AP 1 shots for a squad of very, very durable models. That if you get close, they also have a missile system. If you spend points, they have all these war gear options to let them do that. And you could take and that was a single heavy support choice. In 3rd edition, that was crazy. In 4th edition, it was still really good. In 5th edition, it's still viable. And in 6th edition, the only reason why you didn't see as many broadsides doing railguns was because you had broadsides with missile pods, and you had broadsides with the insane missile pods, and then you had other stuff in the heavy support slot that would take it up. Well, not in the heavy support slot. You would have the Lord of War choice for the Riptide, which would take all the points for it, because the Riptide was so unbelievably broken at the time that you wouldn't have, nobody would not take it entirely, because the entire rest of the game, the rest of the game's power creep around the Tau Codex for 5th and 6th edition had gone so out of control that if you played an enemy that wasn't bringing a super heavy to the game and you brought a super heavy, you were a dick. And if you played an enemy who wasn't bringing a super heavy to the game, the guy absolutely was not playing to win, because very few armies could win against other armies with super heavies without their own Lord of War choice. But I digress. Let's move on.
All significant upgrades and characters, therefore, all contained or were wholly made up of white metal. The entire range upon release can be summed up as the Shazo, the Ethereal, Crisis Suits, Stealth Suits, Fire Warriors, Pathfinders, Kroot, the Kroot Shaper, Krootox, Broadside Battle Suits, Devilfish, and lastly, the Hammerhead with Railgun only.
Railgun only is not true. They had the ion cannon in this book that he has here. He hasn't read it, apparently. Additionally, he forgot drone squads, which were a really cool unit. Not in the sense that they were really good, but cool unit in the sense that it was like Rippers, where you could have a choice that was made up of these spare bits that you got with every box set. And GW doesn't do stuff like that anymore. As I've talked about when I did the when I did the Codex retrospective of this Codex on screen here, with the assistance of Von Shi and another random from the Alpha Legion. Additionally, he also forgot Kroot Hounds and drone squads, and just it was a very small range for when this Codex came out. But to be fair, armies were much smaller in 3rd edition, even during the end of in its waning days, when this book came out. And in addition to that, this entire range was totally new. Totally new. He he doesn't really talk about that, because every other range before that for the rest of the books had been around functionally since 2nd edition, if not 1st edition. So even if they had totally new model ranges, like Space Marines usually seem to get every edition, where they get an entire new box set of everything they already had, they still at least had a basis to fall back on. Whereas this army didn't actually have that many choices. It had 2 in every slot, and and half of them were kind of just there.
Drones were few, and actually an ancillary unit of perhaps 1 or 2 drones attached to anything else, and
they're not. Drones were never few. I don't know where he's coming from with this. I'm probably going to say this a lot, is where is he coming from with this? Because I'm trying to act like this is my first time seeing this, so I don't immediately spoil everything for you, but at the same time, this is a thing I'm going to be saying a lot, is where is he coming from with this? Where did you get that? What are you talking about? Who the fuck are you? Stuff like that. A lot, because every single Tau player I've known, ever, and every Tau player I've seen at tournaments, I've seen on YouTube, I've seen on Roll20, I've seen anywhere, has always used drones to the greatest extent of their abilities when possible, because they've always been ridiculously cost-effective for what they do.
That was the entire codex, if I'm remembering it correctly. Now, according to several sources, Andy Chambers, the chief designer at the time, stated that the Tau were intended to be altruistic and idealistic, believing heartily in unification as the way forward.
Citation needed. The Tau had weird, like, implications of grim darkness in their fluff as far back as this codex. And, like, the people that said otherwise and have been upset about them since then are being ridiculous, because this is the only book that you could reliably say they were 100% idealistic for, and even then it's debatable.
Graham McNeil, who was responsible for a lot of the background material produced for them, developed what Andy Chambers described as their proud, quiet, but determined character, and developed it to the point where they actually became rather likeable, if slightly naive addition to the game and cosmos. So,
which is a gigantic missed opportunity, because having a lot of... There's very little work. Like, it's probably the Fire Warrior game and its novel, and, like, maybe a few short stories here and there in some of the codexes before 5th edition, where the Tau are actually seen as naive, but you never really have, other than those Fire Warrior properties, you never really have a work that is a perspective that shows the Tau perspective on stuff where it's actually them just being naive, because the Tau are a perfect stepping in point for new players to 40k. And they never really embraced that and botched it totally. And then Tau became a perfect stepping in point for players in 40k who didn't actually want to learn anything about 40k. Like, the lore in 40k is incredibly dense, and instead of trying to, as opposed to making it less dense, instead of trying to having other viewpoints that would be gradients into it, GW has continued to just double down on making it good guys versus bad guys, and turning the entire thing into a marketing scheme for Space Marines versus everybody else who is just there to serve as bad guys in the background that they haven't been able to phase out yet, because that's essentially the direction GW is going, is getting ready. They're not immediately right now, but I believe that they're trying to phase out basically everything they can that's not Space Marines, because the Horus Heresy showed them that just Space Marines on Space Marines and nothing else is a totally viable business model.
The story goes. Now, 4th and 5th edition, this is where they started to expand the Tau a little bit. The introduction of the ion cannon to the arsenal, useless as it was at the time.
That's just wrong. Like, that's just incredibly wrong and stupid for him to say. The ion cannon was in the first codex as the alternate weapon option on the hammerhead, other than the railgun. And this is the second time he's gone out of his way to say the hammerhead only had that until this codex, which is just stupid. I don't really get it, honestly, why he says shit like this. Because the ion cannon was a game winner in low point games, because the majority of enemies that you fought as Tau, or as anybody really, were Space Marines, because like half the player base is Space Marine players of some variety, like Imperial Space Marines. I'm not counting Chaos Marines, I'm not counting Grey Knights, I'm not counting, well, I guess I should count Grey Knights, I'm not counting Sisters of Battle. I mean specifically people who play Codex Space Marines, Space Wolves, Blood Angels, one of those variants. And it's patently ridiculous to say not only to get like the timing off for an entire edition of a weapon that was a game changer in 3rd edition and was still good in 4th edition, but also to say that it's totally useless. Like, that's absurd. That weapon had an absurd range. I believe it was like 60 inches, and it was strength 7, AP 3, heavy 3 on a tank with ballistic skill 4. Odds were you would kill 2 Marines a turn with that, if not 3. Odds were it made back the points cost of the cannon itself every time it fired. And even if the tank wasn't doing too great a work, it was a fantastic distraction card effects, because hammerheads were not that expensive. And a single hammerhead in a 500-point game with an ion cannon was terrifying, and they only got worse. Like, the only reason why this guy, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt and saying he actually did fight Tau, and that's not just this is not just just some ridiculous assertion he's making based off of nothing. The like the Tau Tau players in games in 4th edition, they were very, very likely to have been like you would have they were very likely to be running just 3 broadside teams if they've maxed out their heavy support slots. Like, the Hammerhead was rarer than broadsides, not because the Hammerhead was bad, but because broadsides were really good. Really, really good. And that's just how the game was played. Like, that's just how the metagame works. Because if you had something that could penetrate armor 13, you could kill a Hammerhead in a single turn. If you had something that could get through a 2+ armor save, then it still took you a while to get rid of a broadside team because there'd be 3 of them, they had 2 wounds each, and they could have shield drones. That not only were they ablative wounds, but they also were 4-up invulns. And I'm not just bringing this up to make the point about broadsides, but also because, once again, he said before, you didn't see a lot of drones. Like, bullshit. Shield drones have been a pain in everybody's ass for over a decade now. for going on 2 decades now. And I don't know why you would say otherwise. If you've actually played them, at least. If you haven't, which having seen this multiple times, I really am thinking that you're just making a lot of these criticisms up, and that you didn't actually play against this army all that much, or played this army, or knew anybody who had this army, really. Because just a lot of the stuff that you're saying about them doesn't make any sense.
Drone teams, also the Vested, or as Marine players came to know them at the time, those fuckers that sort of power armor in droves.
More like those fuckers nobody takes because they're overly expensive and have really low range for what they do.
Also at this time we met the Piranha, the Skyray, as well as the introduction of fucking Marker Lights.
Marker Lights were in 3rd edition. What are you talking about? Marker Lights were in 3rd edition. I don't know what exactly you're talking about here. That's very strange.
The annoying gimmick weapon, which apparently, despite having the same technology, no other race employs because, derp.
It's more like to set them apart, and also the other races don't really need marker lights, in case you haven't noticed. Well, also, that's not even true. Space Marines got the thing called the Signum for their Devastator squads, and they could take on commanders. And the Signum was functionally the same thing as a marker light, but better because it didn't, you could put it on your heavy weapons squads that already were Ballistic Skill 4, versus the Tau, who needed marker lights to be Ballistic Skill 4 because they were arbitrarily Ballistic Skill 3. As I went over, Sisters of Battle and Inquisitorial troops were Ballistic Skill 4 when they were just regular unaugmented humans, or non-Space Marines. And they also were Ballistic Skill and Weapon Skill 4 in some cases. The Tau, who trained in nothing but ranged warfare, they have superior optics, they have marker lights, they have drone technology, they have possible AIs, they have targeting solutions from orbit, they have tons of air power that can give them forward intelligence. All of this shit, they need a marker light to be Ballistic Skill 4, because their troops are still Ballistic Skill 3, and they're Weapon Skill 2. And they had been for 4 editions. And I don't know where you're coming from, where you're going to say the marker light was some weird gimmick weapon, when it was it's not really a gimmick weapon so much as it was a core of their playstyle, and had been since they were introduced. It was the whole reason to take Pathfinders. It was the whole reason to take Shazwi upgrades, because you don't just the Shazwi is not there for the additional attack because they don't get into close combat. He's not there for the additional leadership because their leadership is mediocre anyway. He's there so you can give him a marker light so he can target stuff. And I need to make this clear. The other races don't use marker lights because for the same stuff that Tau had marker lights for in half the time, other races didn't need. Not only did you have Space Marines, and to a certain extent some Inquisition guys having stuff like targeters and Signums at the time of this codex coming out and prior, but the Imperial Guard, Sisters of Battle, Space Marines of all varieties, none of them needed to have a marker light to fire a Hunter Killer missile. Tau, if I recall correctly, you needed a marker light a target for them to fire a Seeker missile off of any of their shit. And you didn't the Tau needed marker lights to guide any half of their stuff other than just shooting. The shooting it just made better, obviously, but to guide secret missiles or really anything else, you needed a marker light on target to even have the option available in this codex, if I recall correctly. And for Space Marines and Inquisition, they didn't, and like Imperial Guard calling artillery strikes, like artillery strikes and orbital strikes from any of those three factions, you didn't need a marker light. You don't need a guy with a laser pointer. They just fucking knew how to call the grid coordinates directly in front of them for a lance strike from something in orbit. Like, I don't know. Like, I get it that you're angry at marker lights because they're a ridiculous meme of the whole, like, you know, everyone gets +1 ballistic skill in this unit, or you get to reduce cover saves or whatever. But acting like, you know, it wasn't a major part of what made the Tau, and that other factions didn't have similar options that were also as annoying, i.e. targeters in 3rd and 4th edition on Inquisition troops where they could pre-measure before pre-measuring was allowed. Like, come on.
Apart from that, the fluff didn't really change. The Tau expansions continue in the same vein as before, and we get some interesting characters and the concept of different types of battle suits and commanders we hadn't seen before.
I don't know exactly what you mean, other than, like, they had the upgrade kit that was like these headpieces on the crisis suits, and the two pewter headpieces for the crisis suit commanders and bodyguards, and the two possible options of like the cyclic ion blaster pictured here and the air-bursting fragmentation projector. And then other than that, the only new battle suits were the XV-25 upgrades of the stealth suits that look bigger and bulkier and more like battle suits as opposed to the XV-15, and the XV-22 personal battle suit that Shadow Sun used. Because in this edition, like the only new special characters they added were Shadow Sun and An'Shi, Anva, Master of the Undying Spirit. An'Shi and Commander Farsight were already in the 3rd edition codex. Like, you're implying far more than was actually, like, you're implying far more content and depth than that was actually there. Though the lore did change quite a bit because they made it much more overt that there was grim dark shit going on in this book than they did in the 3rd edition one.
Basically, stock standard stuff. Now, 6th edition, well, this is the meat of the story.
I wouldn't say that, but go on.
6th edition is where we first started to see some big change-ups. Lore-wise, the Tau was starting to turn nefarious, with the ethereal casts turning out to be string pullers hell-bent on domination, the introduction of disgraced generals, Farsight going his own way, and
Farsight had a special rule in the 3rd edition book about how he was a renegade general because the implications that the ethereals were nefarious were there since the get-go. This is flatly stupid for you to say stuff like this. This means you have not read anything up until this point. And even then, and you might not have even read anything at this point, you might just be reading like a summary article on 1D4chan of what's going on, written by some guy who got into the game 4 years ago and doesn't give a fuck about any of the prior editions. Like, just, I don't know where you get off saying stuff like, you know, generals going their own way and Farsight. Like, Farsight in the first codex was a renegade. He has a special rule entirely about that, where it changes how his army composition is because he's a renegade. That has been there since day fucking one.
The tech of the Empire was being seriously ramped up with the addition of the Riptide battlesuit. Gameplay-wise, the Tau was supplemented by a far more powerful commander, who was known for buffing units significantly, and the broadside missile spam.
This is not something he really addresses, but I'm just going to use this as a springboard to say, part of the issues with the Tau commanders being like, and to a lesser extent, which he also doesn't talk about, Commander Shadow Sun being ridiculous buff HQ units, in addition to all powerful range units in their own right, is entirely because of all the bullshit Forge World did. Because between the ends of 3rd edition and until this codex came out in 6th edition, I should say, the Tau got continuous testing. Like, they had the Forge World continuously made new units for them that they used as testing beds for some of the rules that they eventually came out with in 6th edition. And I know I'm saying testing bed, which really isn't the case, because it's more like Forge World comes up with cool, unique ideas for their own shit, and then GW's writers steal from them and make really, really dumbed down pedestrian versions of the same rules that end up being more overpowered at the end of the day, which is like the case for a lot of the stuff they've done. But that's basically what happened. Like they had, I can't remember the designation off the top of my head, but there was a commander variant of the crisis suit that Forge World came out with that had this targeting spine that came over the top of its back and looked out, and it was a hardwired marker light system so that the Tau commander could do the same thing. And then Shadow Sun had the whole problem of, in the 6th edition, the way the USRs worked was stealth and shrouded could be were like Crusader or Furious Charge or Counterattack, where they were conferred to the rest of the unit, even if the rest of the unit they were attached to didn't have that special rule. So Shadow Sun was ridiculously broken because even though she's always been mediocre, she had stealth and shrouded because she's a stealth suit. So you would attach her to a Riptide because the Riptide technically was a whole unit, not a solo unit because it had its own drones. And then suddenly the Riptide and all the drones it was attached to, in addition to Shadow Sun and all of her drones, all had a +3 to their cover save, even in open ground. It was ludicrous. And I don't know why he doesn't bring that up when he's gonna complain. I believe up to 3 times in it, like not only this previous one I just stopped at, but twice after this about how the commander was a really overpowered unit because it buffed everything around it. Even though that's like literally the only commanders in the game that didn't buff their own units, that didn't buff their own army in some gay way during 6th edition was like Chaos Space Marines and some of the other Forgotten Codexes and like Necrons. Like almost every, like not counting special characters obviously because special characters do all kinds of things, but almost every Space Marine commander, almost every Orc war bosses obviously, and like most of the Eldar commanders in some way were able to affect the rest of the army by being there or with attached units. And you know, I'm not saying it's his complaints about the Tau commander specifically are illegitimate, but it seems to be a bit weird that like it's not okay when a Tau commander gives somebody +1 ballistic skill or essentially a marker light buff or something for being there. But we don't talk about the shenanigans that was, you know, Space Marine commanders being like, okay, all the bikes are troops now because in 4th edition there was a White Scars, in 4th edition, 5th edition there was a White Scar special character that got that. Now in 6th edition, regular captain, if you mount him on a motorcycle, all Space Marine bikers, scout bikers, and attack bikes are troop choices.
Aforementioned Riptide Battlesuit was also a game-breaking entity and the first Tau Uber unit. Now, what is an Uber unit? Well, as mentioned in several other videos, this is the term I've coined for the large kits released in Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000 from 2011 onwards, such as the Riptide, Wraith Knight, Dread Knight, Necrosphinx, Mutalith, Mauler Fiend, etc., etc. I could go on.
This is weird because the Mutalith and the Mauler Fiend were terrible in 40k and nobody used them. The Necrosphinx was fantasy only, and the Dread Knight and the Wraith Knight and Imperial Knights, strangely you never really complain about Imperial Knights. So far I've not seen any videos from the Outer Circle that have been complained about the shenanigans that are Imperial Knights and everything they represented. And sadly the Gorkanauts, like the Morkanauts and the Gorkanauts, which were just like, they're kind of bad. And like none of that stuff you really complain about. And the Imperial Guards Uber unit, so to speak, like all the Baneblade and its 1,000,001 variants, technically existed as a plastic kit. Like they existed for Forge World forever, and then they existed as a plastic kit in like 2009, like 2008, 2009, around when Apocalypse came out, and that first like those plastic kits came out, and the those were technically also, I guess you would call Uber units. But, like, all of these existed prior to the Riptide. The Riptide was broken, yes, for a number of reasons. But, like, a lot of the stuff that it did was stuff that other armies already had, and you haven't complained about them. You'll talk in a minute about the 30-inch jump that it has. And it's like the Dread Knight had a once-per-game, like, gigantic teleport it could do. That's arguably worse, because the Dread Knight's also a close combat unit. And that, like, I have not seen you ever complain about that. I've not seen you complain about, like, how undercosted knights are. I didn't see you complain about, like, this, like, the Wraith Knights, just shenanigans of, like, the Wraith Knight and the Wraith Guard at the time being utterly ridiculous and game-breaking on their own. But, like, no, you're gonna go on here for the next, like, 3 minutes of this, like, of this thing about how insanely bad the Riptide is, and it's bad, wrong, evil for the Tau to have it. Even though literally every other faction in the game at the time, with the exception of Tyranids and Chaos Marines, really, and Necrons to a certain extent, did not have an Uber unit, let alone anything that could compete with Uber units. Though Necrons kind of did.
These are large units which are designed to be a must-take in your force, and are often cheaper than they should be, and their rules are written with selling the kits in their mind first and foremost.
This is hilarious that you say this, because the design philosophy since Matt Ward started working at GW, not at GW, but started working on codexes for Warhammer 40,000 and onward, like, basically, like, I'm not saying it's explicitly he did this in mind, but since he started working, that was functionally a thing. The design philosophy for the end of 4th edition onward and 40k was, all right, let's add new units that we're going to force players to take by making them too cost effective and better and cooler than units they used to have. See, and like a good example of this is everything Matt Ward did with any of the Space Marine codexes he wrote from 4th edition onward, and stuff like the Crudex, the 5th edition Tyranid Codex, where the Carnifex was a unit that every Tyranid player had forever, and then, like, after that Codex, Carnifexes were worthless. Everybody better go out and buy some new garbage like the fucking Hive Guard now, because they're undercosted, they take up a different slot that nobody used, and they have rules that break the game over its knee. Like, just I really just don't know where you're coming from with some of this, because these are things that were an issue way before 6th edition and way before the Tau came out in 6th edition. But you seem to be acting like it's crystallized with the Riptide.
But I must say, they don't always achieve that goal. Now, what did this actually mean in, well, gameplay and lore terms? Well, it's the first gameplay/lore cracking point for the Tau, as you now had a large monstrous creature, so powerful that you'd be foolish to not take one, and this led to armies generally having 2 to 3 of them in their arsenal, despite the fluff explicitly stating that their rarity within the Empire was due to a lack of materials, and there was probably only a few dozen in commission at any time. Well, didn't matter, because whilst this alone didn't ruin anything, it did start to spoil the immersion somewhat, because
I don't know where you're coming from with the immersion angle. 40k, since about halfway through 5th edition, has been like almost all whack fags playing the game and pretending that they care about the fluff. Like, if the majority of the fan base, or even, like, you know, a large minority of the fan base, were playing for the lore, then there would be shops where Dread Knights weren't allowed, that, you know, people didn't use the 5th edition Tyranid Codex and just used the old rules. And you wouldn't have, like, all of this weird, almost religious orthodoxy of using the new stuff, regardless of its abilities. You will address it in a minute. Like, coming up in a second, you will address it, but you won't really explain the whole issue or really call attention to it. And it annoys me, because the thing about the Riptide was, like, it was still 0-1. It was just, you know, most Tau players were whack fags because Tau, as a faction, were written poorly, because instead of embracing their lore, they got put on the back burner, and they ended up being a faction for people who wanted to play the game who didn't want to know anything about 40k to play them. And that's why you had nothing but power gamers in the faction, in addition to the fact that just they've always been very viable. And it's kind of just ridiculous to act like, you know, the Riptide is the Riptide being like not being rare enough was an issue when the whole of 6th and 7th edition were characterized by people taking formations that let them ignore unit limits and take nothing but trash like this over and over again everywhere. And like this is not once again, as I've said with my previous complaints that just seem to be like just I don't know where you're fucking coming from. This is not an issue core to Tau. It's not an issue that's been core to Tau. It was an issue that took place before the this Tau Codex and all the shenanigans within were even on the radar. And it's just insane to me that you have not addressed this at all. At all. In addition to that, lore breaking standpoint, like one of the lore breaking standpoints you should have mentioned is that the Tau had a 4th edition codex where the only alien auxiliary they added were Vespid and they sucked. And Kroot got no options despite the fact that they came out at the same time as the Kroot mercenaries list in White Dwarf that had multiple different Kroot kindred like Headhunters and Vulture Kroot. And they never came out with something like a Narlock model or something, which would have been really cool to have. And it would have also created a new market demographic for GW, or at least split a demographic between Tyranid players and them, because Tyranid players were the only ones that could really get giant monsters. And you could have added Squiggoths and giant demons and Narlocks to other factions, like, Orcs, Chaos, and Tau Empire, or Kroot in this case, that are working for the Tau Empire. That would have, made more sense on a marketing perspective, and they didn't. And, I don't know... I don't know why these are not criticisms you've come up with beforehand or said about any of the other factions, really, or just, at least, in the very least, talk about in a way that doesn't make it sound like the only time you started caring about this was when the Tau did it.
To visit any store or tournament, you'd only be confronted by a force of minimum squads of Fire Warriors or Kroot, and dozens of Riptides and Tau commanders who buff them on every single table.
You saw minimum squads of Fire Warriors and Kroot with every Tau army since 4th edition. Just people like battlesuits. That was why most Tau players were there. They played for the battlesuits. I don't know why you're saying that it was something suddenly out of the ordinary. What? Where's the video you have where you talk about how, the year before this codex came out, when you went there, every table was nothing but Grey Knights players with Dread Knight, just minimum squads of Grey Knights, and hundreds and hundreds of Dread Knights. Oh my god. Right, Cyphelman Dreadnoughts and Dread Knights everywhere. It was horrible. Where's the video before that where you went, every single Tyranid army was minimum everything except for 3 Tervagons, Dutch ovening the entire battlefield. Oh my god, the objective games, they were awful. Why? Why have you, where are your complaints about other factions when it comes to the same stuff? Where is the indication that this is part of a grander trend in the metagame of 40k and not something exclusive to the Tau? There isn't any, because you're fucking dumb.
Further to this, they were a downright nasty addition to the game, able to absolutely pepper assault armies, which generally got a lot worse in 6th edition, with no charging from vehicles and variable assault ranges, both hampering them significantly.
And Overwatch, but let's not talk about Overwatch. That people like Overwatch, that means it can't possibly have been a bad addition to the game. Or at the very least, a massive change to how the game was played.
If the assaulting army got close to the battle suits, the suits could actually overcharge and effectively jump over the enemy force and away to safety.
This complaint is stupid, not just because of what I said before about how there was other units that are going to do this and he's not acting like that. That's just been a continual problem. But the Riptide could overcharge and do its 30-inch jump, but every single battle suit that wasn't a broadside, with every single thing in the army that had a jetpack, all jetpack infantry, the type, the qualifier jetpack X, jetpack infantry, jetpack cavalry, jetpack monstrous creature in the case of a Riptide. Jetpack, The qualifier that the Tau pioneered and brought into the game themselves was a thing they have had since 3rd edition. Not even as a qualifier, but all the same rules were there. This has always been here. That crisis suits and stealth teams can and will, during the assault phase, just hop away. They can hop in movement, they can shoot you, and then they can hop away and tell you to go fuck yourself. Like, that's always been a thing. And on top of that, the Dread Knight could do its ridiculous 30-inch teleport, and it's an assault unit, so it could teleport right into the enemy's face and then hit them with the giant fucking sword on the dumb baby carrier of a model. And that's not precedent for this. No. The Tau are the ones who did this first. They're the ones who've caused this evil.
And whilst not common, I did once see a Khorne Berserker force preparing for a turn 4 mass charge, having made it all the way across no man's land, only for 2 Riptides to jump 30 inches clean over their heads and safely out of their assault range for the entire rest of the game.
Yeah, well, the problem that dude was having was not even the Tau player, it was the fact he was playing Khorne Berserkers in 6th edition. You know, an army that was thrown overboard like 3 editions ago.
Fun and
or two editions ago, I should say.
Balanced gameplay right there. By the way, the Berserker player quit the game after that. The broadsides also added to this with their ability to shoot multiple high-strength missiles each, with accompanying drones also adding the weight of fire of multiple missiles with their own missile pods. And the Tau commander, who was guaranteed to be attached to them, his job was to increase the ballistic skill of the unit, ignore cover, grant night vision, that sort of thing. This combination of buffing commander, riptides and broadsides was further supplemented by the addition of the Sky Shield landing pad, which was a purchasable fortification in 6th.
This complaint is ridiculous on its face for a number of reasons. One, the Sky Shield landing pad was an Imperial fortification that was available to everybody, and it was part of like the dumb fortification meta of 6th edition that was an issue for everybody involved. 2, fortifications were stupid. They weren't faction specific. They cost points. They were there as a marketing scheme for GW to sell people more terrain options because City of Death wasn't selling too great anymore. And all of them were overpowered as a result because, like I said before, their marketing scheme was, if we just keep making stuff ridiculous, people will have to buy it to maintain, to stay competitive. Sky Shield landing pad was not a problem for just the Sky Shield landing pad was not a problem just for the Tau, and saying that it was is just absurd. It's absurd, and it's incredibly biased on your part if you're acting like it was just the Tau who made it a problem. I don't expect to find a video in your library where you complain about Tyranid players using a plasma obliterator turret or something like that. It's stupid. It's a piece of terrain you can set up on your side of the field regardless of mission stats, and it gives you an invulnerable save. Yeah? Well, what's to stop everybody else from taking it? What's to stop Guard from doing the same thing and parking like artillery units on it that are vehicles with 4-up invulns and something? Nothing. Nothing stops them other than the points cost. This is not a Tau-specific complaint. It's just metagame that you're bringing up to acting like it's just their fault.
Edition, and which, when said units were deployed within it, they gained a 3+ invulnerable save.
3+ invulnerable saves were bullshit since Matt Ward came up with them for Storm Shields. Fight me. This is not a Tau-specific problem, once again. This is an issue that has been going on for multiple editions before now. Before that was a thing, you should have fucking stated that earlier. You should have complained about 3-up invulns on Storm Shields. You should have complained about 3-up invulns on Chapter Masters. You should have complained about Chapter Master Smashfucker. You should have complained about Necron units with 3-up invulns. You should have complained about just the shenanigans of later on in this edition and the next edition, Thousand Suns with re-rollable 3-up invulns and stuff. Why is it only a problem when the Tau do it with an option that's not even specific to them, that anybody can have? Oh, it's because you're biased, that's why. I forgot.
What the fuck?
My point exactly.
This was further worsened by the Allied Matrix, which was introduced with seemingly little to no thought as to how balance would be affected.
Nothing GW has done for the last 15 years has been done with anything, at any point have they ever thought of balance. They have not implemented anything with any thought towards balance. I don't know what you're talking about. And as far as the whole allied matrix in general, see my points about the fortifications. This is not a Tau-only problem. You're just showing off bias here.
And the prolific Tau, a combination of Eldar and Tau, which involved the broken Eldar and the broken...
Eldar have been broken for 6 editions. Shut the fuck up.
Broken Tau, plugging each other's weaknesses. And the Tau further having their ranged firepower improved and supplemented by Farseers casting psychic blessings on them. So, I'm sure at this point in the video, people are wondering why I'm pointing out the meta of the game so much. Well...
Oh no, the meta of the game. Your audience is fucking stupid if they're complaining to you about you pointing out the meta. The meta of the game is the whole driving factor of why the lore is garbage these days. It's every single dumb thing that happens in the lore, all the bad writing. You can blame the weather, you can blame a force of nature, you can blame Graham McNeil and Gav Thorpe and C.S. Godot and bitch your eyes out about it, but the truth is that every single thing in the lore that happens that makes no sense with the established canon and is not consistent with 40K's aesthetic or its themes or anything prior is because of the metagame pushing model sales. And you and your audience are incredibly dumb if you're going to discount the meta as being an important factor in all of this garbage.
It's important because this is where the traditional Tau army, composed of mostly fire warriors...
The traditional Tau army was only ever composed of mostly fire warriors in 3rd edition, because in 3rd edition, strength 5, AP 5, rapid fire at 30-inch, a 30-inch range rapid fire gun with that strength and AP was absurd. And still, up into 7th edition, was still the best standard armament in the game, arguably, barring maybe the Gauss Flare. And the Gauss Blaster, because for some reason in 6th edition and 7th edition they thought it was a good idea to make Necrons have Immortals as troops. Look, this point, I'm speaking to the audience again, at this point he's going to start talking about how the Tau army used to just be Kroot and Fire Warriors and stuff. Bullshit. It has never been just a lot of Fire Warriors and a lot of Kroot. You could field a lot of Fire Warriors and a lot of Kroot, and it would be effective in earlier editions. But ultimately, Tau armies have always been minimal numbers of troops, lots and lots of battle suits, because battle suits were worth their weight in gold, and have always been. They've never been bad. Not a single battle suit type has ever been bad. It was just an issue of if they were more cost effective than one or the other.
With some close combat capable Kroot sprinkled in there to defend them, some short-range hit-and-run battle suits to knock out enemy tanks, Terminators, heavy armor, that sort of thing.
Some.
These were all superseded completely by larger battle suits. No longer was it viable to use Kroot or Vespid. The firepower and resilience of the enemies had simply increased too much.
It was never viable to use Vespid, and Kroot stopped being viable in 5th edition because they just people just had too much stuff that they would just avoid forests because Kroot had to depend on cover saves. I don't know what you're talking about here. I really don't know where you're coming from with that.
Outstripping their capabilities. The Fire Warrior didn't offer enough to be included in anything more than minimum quantity, as they were wasting valuable game-winning points which the battlesuits could use instead.
That has been the case since 4th edition onward. I don't know why you're acting like it's suddenly a thing in 6th.
This was further worsened by the arrival of the Farsight Enclave's subcodex, which practically did away with the Force Org chart entirely by allowing crisis suits to be taken as troops.
You know that thing that pretty much half the Tau player base has wanted since day one was just crisis suits as troops? You know that this thing that was basically something that was already happening with other armies? What is the Death Wing? What is Drago Wing? What is... tell me, what is Drago Wing? What is the Necron army lists, 5th edition and onward? Like, your complaints about the crisis suits and everything being like, oh, there's minimal squads of this. That was an issue in 5th edition with Dark Eldar, because the best thing to take as Dark Eldar was tons and tons of Blasterborn in your Elite's choice, and everything else is minimal. You take, like, 3 Ravagers, or, like, some Jet Fighters and a Ravager, and then 3 units of Blasterborn, and fuck everything else. Like, same thing with Guard. Like, Guard didn't even need the Leaf Blower or the parking lot shenanigans. They could have just had, like, just nothing but Meltavets as their troops. And then their elites would just be, more Melta and other special weapons on stormtroopers, or just rattling snipers during these same editions, and like the earlier editions even. And you're acting like the Farside Enclaves was this massive fucking game changer. No, the most revolutionary thing Farside Enclaves did was putting the final nail in the coffin of Farside's lore, where he went from being mysterious and cool, and the whole idea of the Farside Enclaves being mysterious and cool, into just it's just kind of there now. There's demons and stuff, Macronophagic sword, all this jerk offery, and then the whole like let's have the 7 samurai, or the 8 samurai in this case, of just 8 fucking special characters that you can take as a single unit and just wipe the board off the table. Like, just wipe everything off the board with this stupid unit of, you have a special character Riptide. You have special characters that have, like, more than the max allowed weapon systems just cuz. I really don't understand where you're getting half of your fucking opinions from.
And worse yet, the very first data slates, which were introduced in Warhammer 40,000, included some for the Tau, which gave you a Riptide and a unit of 3 broadsides without using any Force Org slots, and it was cheaper in points.
I already said this about formations in general. This is not a Tau core problem. You want to talk about bullshit formations? There was a formation for Space Marines that let you take Assault Marines and Devastators for cheaper than usual, and it let them all deep strike as a single unit with very little scattering. The Assault Marines got to charge the same turn they deep struck, and the Devastators got to fire the same turn they deep struck twice. But Riptide and 3 broadsides for like points deduction. That's way worse than this Space Marine unit that fundamentally breaks the rules of the game that have been in place for 7 editions, or 6 editions, I should say, before this.
Absolutely game-breaking. From this point on, the Tau were no longer the Asian-inspired force which used a harmonic combination of earth, fire, water, and air casts.
There was no harmonic combination of those casts. The earth and water casts were never on the field, and the air cast only showed up if you played with Forge World bullshit, or if you unironically used the Sun Shark, like stuff like the Sun Shark that they introduced in 6th edition. Like, there was never any harmonic convergence or something. Nobody took ethereals unless you took on Shi. You people played with minimum fire warriors, some Krook to screen, and then like tons and tons of Pathfinders, broadsides, and crisis suits. Maybe stealth suits. Maybe a hammerhead. I really don't understand where you're coming from with this.
With the ethereals at their head and a mix of subservient races to fight their battles. Instead, Gundam Wing Tau was now the future. The Tau were always a gunline army, to be fair, and a bit of a pain to play against, but they weren't outright despised until 6th edition.
Bullshit. This is a thing I've been waiting to talk about for a while. The Tau were despised from day one because of a thing called Fish of Fury, which you have not fucking brought up at all throughout this entire video. I don't understand where that is, why you are like this. Like, I want to know why you are like this, because it frightens me. It frightens me to no fucking end that you talk like this, that you continue to fucking say these things, that you're trying to make these statements that seem to be just unironic belief that what you're saying is true to the time period you're speaking to, and is not like just some bullshit that you made up on the fly based on shit you read on the internet from people who don't play the fucking game. Or didn't play the fucking game at the time. Like, it just... none of the, like, so far, none of your anecdotes and none of the stuff that's, like, you've said about the metagame has indicated that you ever played against Tau earlier than 6th edition.
If people played Tau, or even Necrons and Eldar in this edition, they were instantly disliked simply for the choice of faction, regardless of if they'd stuck with the faction through years of poor codexes, lack of...
What years of poor codexes? What fucking years of poor codexes? Though the Tau have never had a bad codex, Necrons, the Necrons codex at worst before 5th edition was we either steamroll the entire board or we lose everything nearly instantly. Like, Necrons were ironically enough, a very fast army, and Eldar have never, ever, ever been bad. I don't know what the fuck you are talking about here. This is absurd. These implications you're making are crazy.
Releases, or being outright ignored by the company. They finally got a strong codex, and instead, the community hated them for it.
They were never ignored. The only edition they didn't get a codex was 5th. What are you talking... Like, Necrons were more ignored than them, and Necrons were never even totally dropped. Like, where's your points about the Sisters of Battle? Where are your points about, like, the fucking 12 years the Dark Eldar spent with nothing? Where are your points about how, like, every single edition since the 4th edition codex came out, the Chaos Marines have been specifically and unironically nerfed and, like, had all of their flavor destroyed over and over and over again? Why are you making these grandiose, implicit statements about what the Tau are and their player base and everything else, when it's like, no, the Tau player base, for the most part, has always been whack fags that had a codex that was totally viable and had tons of options that they could easily screw everybody with. Why, like, you're acting like the Tau are suddenly Tyranids or something. I wonder if you'll do a what broke the fans on orcs, and then just talk about how, like, the orcs used to be, like, the most overpowered army ever until fucking 3rd edition. Oh my god.
Why? Because the company couldn't balance the lists, and so the viable lists naturally were not fun to play against, and made people angry at the players who exploited the rules rather than the company that wrote them. Then we reached 7th edition, and it was really just more of the same. When 7th edition came out, it managed to at least fix the Tau list somewhat, but was otherwise just 6th edition Tau all over again, which isn't surprising considering how little time 7th actually hung around for, and the fact it didn't get a new codex.
This is wrong. The Tau got a 7th edition codex that, funnily enough, had the same art as the 6th edition codex, just with the new 7th edition bordering for their codexes. And this is all, once again, for the audience, this is spoilers, because I'm going to have to stop this in the future because he's going to say some shit, but he's going to act like all the 7th edition stuff came out in 8th edition. And I don't care about 8th edition. There's full disclosure. I don't give a fuck about 8th edition. I don't like it. I don't like anything about it. I don't think it's legitimate as 40k. Like, I've had an on and off issue with 40k's writing and the metagame and just, like, the entire meta, the entire, like, you know, the for lack of a better term, the meta around 40k as an IP, if for lack of a better term, because I guess I can't find anything other than to call it intellectual property. But, like, 5th edition onward, everything in that whole the whole 40k sphere has been going downhill as far as I'm concerned. But 8th edition is where it just fell off a cliff completely, and it's basically no longer the same product. And I will have to address this in the future, obviously. But, like, all that said, I'm going to have to, like, sit here and analyze some of the dumb shit he says about the quote-unquote 8th edition Tau, because none of it's actually true, because it's actually 7th edition stuff, because this idiot can't fucking count, apparently.
Suddenly, though, 8th edition happens. The Tau in 8th...
What's really ironic about this is that is actually the 8th edition codex. But it's just a fucking palette swap of the 7th edition art. and of the 7th edition art that was also the 6th edition art. And the 6th edition, 6th edition, 7th edition, and 8th edition codexes are all the same fucking guy. It's the same jerk-off. On the same, I don't even know if that's the Cold Star suit or not, but it doesn't matter. Whatever.
Are in an interesting place. The addition of Ghost Keel and Storm Surge suits build upon the already mech-heavy army.
Those units were added in the 7th edition. I gotta point this out because you're a moron who apparently doesn't know the fucking difference between 7 and 8.
More and more large units, and sadly not building upon the infantry. The infantry, of course, well, the Fire Warriors are now broken up into 2 types, breachers and strike teams.
Also a 7th edition, and breachers were fucking weird. Breachers were crazy, because they're a close range Tau unit, but they're not close combat. They just have pulse shotguns that wreck you if you get really close. And you don't even talk about them at all, because it's more important to you that alien auxiliaries that you don't know anything about get the spotlight in your fucking own review of what's going on.
Strike Team is bringing the DS8 tactical support turret. Now, with the Kroot, their only saving grace at this point was the ability to take a Krutox, a larger, heavier weapon designed to supplement their squad.
The Krutox is not a heavy weapon. It has a heavy weapon on it, but the Krutox was there because it's a fucking gorilla and it could break tanks. It was also a close combat unit. And yeah, the Krutox with the Kroot gun was pretty good, but the Kroot gun was ultimately just a shittier version of an autocannon. And, just... Still, don't really understand where you're getting off with this when you're talking about, I understand at least the point where the turrets on strike teams and breacher teams made them functionally useless, or made Kroot functionally useless. But Kroot were functionally useless for 2 editions before this, and quasi-useless in edition before that. And on top of this, the turret represents a thing that people, not even just Tau players, but just people in general have been complaining about forever. The Tau, had tons and tons of different weapon options for their battle suits. That their bits themselves weren't even all that big, but their infantry units inexplicably, apropos of every other infantry unit in the universe, could not figure out how to have special or heavy weapons teams. Until they came out with this, and then they just half-ass it with a fucking stationary turret that has this. You couldn't have a Fire Warrior that was some cool guy with a fucking chain gun that was a burst cannon. It was a man-portable burst cannon. Or a burst cannon team with a tripod like the Imperial Guard. You couldn't have a Tau with a cut-down version of a fusion blaster or a plasma rifle. No, you needed to fucking have this basically a terrain piece. Have it. And what was even worse was some of the worst, most egregious shenanigans of the drones in this edition that you don't even talk about when you were complaining about drones earlier. You're not even going to talk about the Grav Wave drone that just knocked everything out of close combat because gravity or some shit? No, you're not, are you? Because you didn't play against this army. I'm pretty sure you didn't. I'm pretty sure you never played this army, you never played against it, you don't even know anybody who runs this army outside of a tournament setting.
Well, the addition of the DS8 turret negated the Kroot's last niche. You see, the Kroot now fight as badly as Tau in close combat. They shoot worse than any Fire Warrior, they have less armor, less firepower, and they cost more points.
This was a problem before, quote-unquote, 8th edition.
The Vespid are being pretty much rendered useless by crisis suits in much the same way. Also, as 8th edition is a much less assault-oriented edition, exemplified by the Primaris who utterly lack any true assault units, there is even less need for a counter-assault or shield line of Kroot. The background fluff already has the writing on the wall for the Kroot Vespid. With the Tau having a tunnel through the warp in their possession, they have systematically killed the other races as they can be corrupted by chaos upon entering it. Further to this, the Dark Eldar have all but purged the Kroot in their raiding. So, to sum it up, the Tau, so far as I can see it, are being sent down one path and one path alone by Games Workshop. This path is a force almost entirely mounted within battlesuits of some kind.
And this is what half of their fan base has wanted forever. I don't know why you're acting like this is I still don't know, even after this whole video, why you're acting like this is like some fucking crazy mystery that came out of nowhere for you.
The other races within the faction are contrary to this goal. Totally different sculpts requiring attention that frankly I don't see the company giving them. It's a shame, because there was scope to make some interesting units. Earth, air and water casts all play a second fiddle in the game to the fire cast. So much
That's because the fire cast are the ones that actually fight, you dingus. Read a book.
so that you may as well not have the cast present and really be on the background wall. The ethereal is used a little bit more now, but again is not the unit which...
I don't know why. Probably because 8th edition has some insane morale mechanics that they finally got rid of and they shall know no fear. But like the ethereal wasn't used before. The only ethereal you saw people unironically using for every edition until 8th was On-Shi, because On-Shi had the parry shenanigans. Ethereals were bad. I don't know why you're acting like people unironically took them. Just like I don't know why you keep implying you saw people running Vespid.
led every Tau army in 3rd and 4th edition.
They did not lead every Tau army in 3rd and 4th edition. If you had... no, that's just wrong.
We could have had unique aircast jump troops.
Why? With their brittle bones and their gravity sickness, they can just jump around? Wait a second. They already have jump units. They're called battle suits. You dingus.
Earthcast field fortifications. Water...
Didn't you just complain about fortifications earlier? Didn't you just bitch about fortifications? Why do we suddenly need blue dwarves running around making more fortifications for a faction that was already overpowered because of fortifications?
Cast intelligence troops.
Or we could just have stealth suits instead of random tall blue people with boob implants.
Firecast samurai-style infantry.
No! Stop with this weeb shit.
But instead, it's battle suits, and only battle suits from here on out. As for the lore and background, the Tau can't expand forever. Not without the divine hand of the company rider coming down like a vengeful fist of God.
And this is not a complaint that you have when any other faction has a divine hand of the word of God come down and fix everything, huh? This is not an issue when, the Ultramarines literally can't even lose a battle against an entire tomb world. No, this is only a problem when it's the Tau expansion. Fucking moron. Why are you complaining about a lack of water cast, of different cast troops, when you should be talking about, why are there not the other Kroot Kindreds and their rules in the game? The other Kroot Kindreds already have precedent. They didn't even, all they needed was war gear upgrades to have Headhunters and Vulturekin and Orc Kroot and all that. Models for Kroot Hawks, if you want to talk about Kroot models. Why didn't they just make Vespid better? You keep implying that people played Vespid, that they were the terror of Marine players or some shit, but they really weren't. Nobody ever ran Vespid because they were like pariahs. They were fucking overly expensive, both points-wise and dollar-wise, because they were nothing but pewter models that cost way too much because GW's greedy. They were jump troops that were in a slot, that they shared a slot with much more useful units, and in an army with much more useful jump troops. And they had a gun that only fired one shot at too short of a range to be effective against anything. What would happen with a regular Vespid unit? It might jump in and then shoot and then charge a Space Marine unit and kill them. But then the Space Marine unit behind them would shoot them to pieces and then finish them off in close combat if there were any left. Or if they didn't run off the board. And what then? The Vespid unit couldn't even kill back its points cost in Space Marines. The unit it's supposed to kill. Their weapons, their neutron blaster that's supposed to be so terrifying was 18-inch range, strength 6, AP 3, but assault 1 on a ballistic skill 3 unit. They were jump infantry, not even jetpack infantry, that had fleet of foot. That was it. That was only the speed they could really reach. They didn't have rending. They didn't have close combat ability. They were still weapon skill 3. They were still only strength 4. They were still only T4. They only had a 4-up armor save. They didn't have any special cover. They had no durability. They had mediocre speed. And they were overcosted for all of that. The only defensive ability they had, and it was dependent on the edition, was if they had a hit and run. And like hit and run is not even all that useful most of the time, because if you can't hit and run out of combat back into someplace else where they can't fight back against you, then you're fucked. And their initiative wasn't good enough to kill Marines in combat anyway and then succeed on a hit and run. Like, I don't know if you actually unironically played with a pack of children that didn't know how the game worked and were unironically using Vespid, or you were just playing nothing but shits and giggles games and are upset about the meta. But it sounds like you just made shit up when you're complaining about this. Like, most of your complaints sound like bullshit. Because you didn't bring up Fish of Fury, which was a real reason why Tau players were hated. You haven't brought up the shenanigans of like all their lore being all over the place when it comes to the justifications for their alien troops that aren't in the game. And then you want more fucking Tau in the game when their whole idea of their faction is that they're a coalition force. And instead of having more, you want more other varieties of the same fucking units and models we've already had, instead of just more Kroot, better Vespid, like Torellian dog soldiers, Demiurge troops, Nikasar psychic auxiliaries, like the Oral, any of the other races they've mentioned in the background that they never really fleshed out. No, you want fucking samurai, you ridiculous weeaboo.
The most likely route that I see will be due to the upheaval of the events Abaddon has set in motion. It will lead to the Tau leaning more and more heavily on their technology, and will only see bigger and stronger battlesuits leading them, which Games Workshop will gladly supplement with the appropriate models. So, what broke the fans? Well, nothing really. As always in this series, the fans weren't broken, they simply piss and moan and the show goes on. But it is interesting to note where the Tau are now, compared to where they were 18 years ago when we first met them.
What broke the fans was just GW in general doing the same thing they've done for every other faction. But what broke me is your lack of honesty and your lack of reading comprehension.